Comparing architecture with nature or nature with architecture. This is an interesting book called Frozen Fountains or Frozen Fountain. Sinbad from the roof of the megapolis views the city of Frozen Fountain. The Frozen Fountain. A work of art must portray not only a world aspect, but the world order through and by means of the concrete and particular. It should suggest the abstract and generic. It must be not only typical, but archetypical. Truth to fact is not enough. Truth to life is what is required. Whatever story it may chance to tell, a work of art must also tell the story of creation. Nature herself gives us the hint of how this can be done. A snowflake, for example, no matter how it may differ from other snowflakes, it is in double tetrahedral form and spine-like structure, revelatory of the nature of water crystallization. The unique form is at the same time a formula of all possible snowflake forms. Applying this principle to architecture, a building over and above revealing its character and function should tell something of the nature of gravitation, suspension, tension, of the properties of form, color, light, and the uniqueness of materials. That concrete is cast in forms, that terracotta is molded and fired, that wood is sawn and planed, stone chiseled and marble polished, in order that its maximum of beauty may appear. This is almost automatically accomplished by following the line of least resistance, by letting the material itself dictate its treatment, by with working to coin a world to fit the case. These are matters of right dramatization, of which nature is the great exemplar. Nature which tirelessly tells the story of creation to our unseeing eyes. It is significant in this connection that our two pioneer functionalists, Louis Sullivan and his pupil Frank Lloyd Wright, were lovers and students of nature. In Sullivan's The Autobiography of an Idea, a passionate feeling for nature is revealed. I love nature ardently, he wrote to me in a letter. And Wright once remarked while we were walking together in the woods, I don't see how a man could be a good architect unless he lives near to nature. It is to their love of nature that I attribute the naturalness of the mental process, their escape from the atrophy of the creative faculty, which so often overcomes the schoolmen, students not of nature but of art. Sullivan, to be sure, was a beaux arts man, but he specifically states that the school did not give him his start. My real start, he says in the autobiography, was made when, as a very young child, living much out of doors, I received impressions from the shifting aspects of nature so deep, so penetrating, that they have persisted to this day. Now, to study nature does not mean to make charming little watercolors of natural objects. Harvey Ellis's aphorism, one should go sketching with one's hands in one's pockets, indicates the more rewarding procedure. The study of nature, not in order to paint her portrait, but to pluck out the heart of her mystery, to discover that is the law according to which she works. For nature is the same in all her parts. Like an air with variations, her visible music consists always and only in innumerable elaborations on one basic thing, and it is only the vast variety of form, color, material, and spatial magnitude and temporal duration that prevents us from perceiving this inner identity, in the same way that it is the dramatic skill and versatility of an impersonator in the matter of facial expression, intonation, gesture, which create the illusion of many different persons instead of always the same one. What is this unit form of nature, the archetype of all visible images? What formula most perfectly expresses our sense of the life process? Is it not an ascension and declension, in brief, a fountain, a welling up of a force from the same mysterious source, a faltering of the initial impulse by reason of some counter aspect of that force, a subsidence, a return, all imaged in the upward rush and downward fall of the waters of a fountain, a skyrocket, a stone flung from the hand into the air. This, of course, tells us nothing of life's meaning. It is merely a symbol of the life process. From nature, we shall never learn life's meaning, for nature is all pictures and no text, and its images tell us only as much as we ourselves are able to read into them. The idea once grasped that life is a fountain, we see always, everywhere, fountains, fountains, the sun itself, the updrawn waters and the descending rain, the elm, the willow, the heart, the phallus, and the mammary gland. But what has all this to do with architecture? The reader may ask. Everything, for if life is indeed a fountain, a struggle upward, and nature a symbolization of the struggle, a work of architecture must be that too, a presentation, in terms of ponderable beauty, of interplay and adjustment of contradictory forces. What happens in a fountain and in its every drop happens also in a building and in all its parts, where stress and strain, compression and tension, thrust and counterthrust are ceaselessly operative. Accordingly, it is the business of the architect to dramatize not only a building's purpose and function, but also the interplay of forces going on within it. And in doing so, he will be dramatizing life itself. What constitutes a thing a work of art in this suggestion of the universal through and by means of the particular? The play Hamlet, for example, is not only life of a man, but the life of man. Every man's struggle with his own self elements, the enemies of his own household. In architecture, these enemies, which are at the same time progenitors and friends, are the forces of nature. The scalding sun, the lashing wind, the disruptive frost, the insinuating rain, agents all in that hypothesis whereby, in the hands of a true dramatist, a work of engineering becomes a work of architectural art. The architecture contains these deeper meanings, and that their showing forth is a conditioning factor of architectural form is no new idea. Irving K. Pond's admirable book, The meaning of architecture is an amplification of this conception of a building as a fountain, a resistance and succumbing. It is an idea of such universality and truth that it cannot be but argument, it cannot but augment the creative power of the architect who is alive to all its implications. It is a usable idea, fertile in ways I shall endeavor to make plain. Sinbad sees the advancing and the retreating waves, an epitome of the life process. A building, a fountain, how clarifying a point of view. I have only to look out of my window at those upthrust acres of steel, brick, and concrete which hide the river, lighten the sunrise, shadow the streets, and diminish the sky to see all in this aspect. The needle-pointed flèche of the Chrysler's tower catches the sunlight like a fountain's highest expiring jet. The setbacks of the broad and massive lofts and industrials appear now in the semblance of cascades descending in successive stages from the summits to which they have been upthrust. The white vertical masses of the Waldorf Astoria, topped with silver, seem a plexus of upward gushing fountains, most powerful and therefore highest at the center, ascending by ordered stages to the broad Park Avenue River. I have but to sit, as I sometimes do, in the dim, quiet nave of St. Thomas's Church in the nearby Fifth Avenue and fix my vision in its aligned piers of stone expanding fanwise into the groined vaulting, to see them as a succession of water jets fixed into immobility, time frozen into eternity. I have but to remember the dome and flanking minarets of Santa Sofia and of the Taj Mahal, Giotto's straight square bell tower beside Brunelleschi's gigantic bubble, the obelisk of Thebes, the shrine of Vishnu at Khanjaro, the diminishing masses of which take on the contours of falling water, to see them all as frozen fountains thrust upward by the same mysterious energy which arises moment by moment in myself. For the very power whereby I perceive these things is the same power whereby they were themselves conceived. The power of the life force, one, through infinitely differentiated and subdivided, as the in a reservoir, when hurled aloft, is split up into pearly drops of crystal ribbons, like souls which, ensuing from the unconscious, trace each a shining parabola in space-time and subside again into the reservoir of life. So let the architect say to himself not only, I shall build enclosures for the shelter and trafficking of human beings, but also I shall create frozen fountains with the vigor of geysers and the placidity of waters stilled at even. Such resolve and such endeavor will constitute for him his accolade. Now, a fountain is a unit which is nevertheless twofold, for it consists of an ascending and descending stream, a resistance and a succumbing, the first active, masculine, the second passive, feminine. Translated into terms of architecture, activity and passivity are epitomized in the vertical member, which opposes the gravitational pull, and the horizontal member, which submits to it. The Greeks, those superb dramatists, instead of leaving the column a mere cylinder of stone, with a splayed top to increase the bearing surface and lessen the span, made of it a tapered, fluted shaft, thus suggesting a powerful rising force, diminishing as it ascends. And they terminated this shaft with a capital, cushion-shaped or downward curled, indicative of the yielding of this force to the downward pressure of the lintel. And having told in this way this story, the tale is continued in the entablature, which the Greeks dramatized in similar fashion. Mr. Pond calls attention to the fact that the forces acting in the entablature are compression above, tension below, while in the middle is the neutral field in which these forces balance one another. Accordingly, in the Ionic tablature, the aesthetic intuition of the architect moved him to use his compressive field of fine-spun lines of tension represented by the fascia of the epistyle, the frieze or neutral zone. He sometimes left plain, sometimes gave over to ornament, but never to the work of the best period did he make the mistake of introducing masses or fields of broken light and shade into the lower portion of the entablature as the cornice. The medieval Masonic guilds, after their own fashion, were not less adept than the Greeks at this order of architectural dramatization, and the Gothic cathedrals of the Ile-de-France exhibit, as complete and felicitous a showing forth of the forces at play within their structure as can be found in the world. The architecture was one with the engineering and the ornament of integral part of the architecture. The pointed arc, which more than anything else may be said to be the norm of Gothic architecture, does not merely represent the opposition and equipoise of two diagonally acting forces, but itself is such an opposition. And this thrust and counter thrust, the controlling principle, determines the characteristic forms. The exterior buttress resists the pressure of the interior vaulting. The pinnacles give an added weight, increasing the stability of the buttress, and so it is throughout. The function creates the form, and the form expresses the function. The stone mullions and their tracery were needed in order to give holdings and stiffness to the leaded glass. String courses and cornice moldings took their characteristic shapes from the washes and undercuttings necessary to throw the rainwater clear of the walls. A gargoyle was an ornament waterspout, and surely nowhere is the fountain idea more felicitously expressed than in this architecture. Exteriorly in the increasing intricacy and fragility of the towers as they ascend, their lessening interiorly in the upward sweep of columns and imposts breaking out into the groined vaulting. The sheer beauty of Greek and Gothic architecture and necessitous beauty has seduced the latter-day architect into the imitation and employment of their characteristic forms, divided from the functions which they originally subserved and to which they eloquently expressed. But in doing so, he violates the most fundamental canon of the architectural art, the dramatization of structure. New materials and building methods, not to mention our altered attitude toward life, imperatively demand a new architectural language. The failure to perceive this constitutes the fallacy of the eclectic architect, he who makes a fetish a mere good taste. The tang of his own time, be it acid or sweet, should flavor everything the architect does, but along with this communication of the immediate, the unique, the special, there should be communicated also some sense of the eternal and absolute. Structured as his work may be, and should be with the spirit of his own time, it should yet be timeless, as are the pyramids of Egypt, the tragedies of Shakespeare, the paintings of Leonardo. The first of these aims he will achieve by a truthful use of materials and the right expressiveness of use and function. The second by a dramatization of the forces at play within the structure. In brief, the fountain. His problem is not basically different from that of the playwright or of the novelist, who, in presenting the characters and relationships of a group of people in a localized environment, gives an insight into life itself and the essential nature of man and woman. In most building operations of any magnitude, solid masonry has been superseded by steel and reinforced concrete. But so great is the power of inertia in the world of thought that even in works of engineering, the old masonry forms still persist. Here is an example taken from my own experience. Having been called upon by an eminent bridge engineer to collaborate with him in the designing of a reinforced concrete bridge, he first made a diagram embodying his idea of the most logical and economical form for it, a series of great semicircular arcs supporting a lesser arcade to carry the roadway. It occurred to me when I looked at it that his conception was conditioned by the tyranny of ideas associated with stone construction, wherein, for strength and stability, supporting members must perf- perforce be vertical and openings must be arched. But in a manner of construction which is monolithic, these necessities do not exist. Accordingly, instead of conveying the weight of the roadway to the main piers by way of vertical supports footing on the arc ring, as is the universal masonry practice, I suggest that these supports be inclined like the ribs of a fan, transferring the weight where it needs must be discharged directly, and departing less from the true line of force. My collaborator at first seemed astonished by the suggestion, but the more he thought about it, the better he liked it. The tree-like form was not only more logical, but it was more beautiful, thus verifying anew the dictum that any increase in fitness is an increase in beauty. I myself like it because it suggests a frozen fountain. Of the tyranny of the old thought forms, the first railway passenger cars and the first automobiles provide a classic illustration. For the former were reproductions in four-in-hand coaches with the addition of flanges to the wheels, and the latter imitated the horse-drawn vehicles of their day. The use of the column, entablature, and arc of steel frame construction is just such a survival. They have no justification in such construction because they falsify it. The vertical members of a skyscraper, for example, are in effect continuous, and the horizontal members, beams though they be for the support of the floors, perform the office of bracing, the whole being, in effect, a truss on end, the verticals corresponding to chords. The right dramatization of all this may still be open to question, but there can be no doubt about the wrong one. To bedeck such a structure with columns, pilasters, cornices, arches, or other cerements of dead styles is to add lying to steel. Such things constitute in this connection what Sullivan calls dissenting lines, as inimical to aesthetic unity of effect as dissenting votes are inimical to political unity. In the still framed building, the height of which is less, or not too much greater than its breadth, it is all right to emphasize the horizontal dimension, thus dramatizing the floor as the important thing. But in true skyscraper, it seems to me that the lines should sweep unbrokenly upward to express the engineering fact of vertical continuity and the poetic fancy of an ascending force in defiance of gravity, a fountain. But what goes up must come down. Gravity reasserts itself after the initial impulse is exhausted. A building, however lofty, must end somehow, and the designer's ability is here put to the severest test, and will be measured by the success with which the termination is effected, by the beauty with which his building dies on the white counterplane of the sky. In this particular, the problem presented by a Gothic cathedral tower is not different from that of a skyscraper, and it is interesting to compare the two typical solutions, one medieval, the other modern. In the spire of Senlis, the transition from the square to the octagon and thence to the pyramid is effected with great subtlety. The angles are filled with miniature towers and spires, and the slender domes set against the faces of the steeple echo, in their verticality, the tower below, and in their peaked roofs, the spire above, like the ascending and returning waters of a fountain in exquisite reconciliation. John Mead Howell's Pan-Hellenic Hotel suggests no less a frozen fountain, the diminishing force having seemingly to have faltered at those mathematically related stages where the setbacks occur, and most powerful at the center, the upthrust terminal, parallelepipedon, finishes in jet-like tracery against the sky. In obedience to a perhaps unconscious intimation on the part of the designer of the building's deeper symbolic significance, he has used the fountain motif in the ornament. Moreover, the long vertical piers terminate in logarithmic spirals, suggestive that the rising force returns, fountain-wise, upon itself. The same symbolism is employed in the Ionic and Corinthian capitals. It would lead only to weariness to multiply examples. These should suffice to make the reader see that even so conditioned, the utilitarian and art as architecture, no less than music, poetry, and drama, may be made to symbolize the life of man as it should be, which, like a fountain, is the first to prevail and then fail, but to fail beautifully, to meet death in the feminine way with the resignation and symbolization of the dome, by the dome, or in the masculine way, like Cyrano, steel in my heart and laughter on my lips, to meet it with defiance and symbolized by the spire. In either case, bubble or jet, effort and its surcease stand epitomized in the fountain. Music is a fountain of sound, upspringingly in time, from the still pool of silence, and because all of the art aspire to the condition of music, architecture attains this most nearly when it suggests the invasion of space by an upthrusting force, a frozen fountain.